Okay, after all that information, here we are ready to begin our painting. As you can see, I've already transferred my drawing onto my watercolor paper. What we're going to do is use a wet on wet technique, meaning that the surface of the paper will be wet first and that the pigment will be quite juicy. Now, if you've watched my other videos, you'll know that I often get so excited about painting that I wet my paper first and then I come back and I mix up my paint. In truth, you should mix up your paint first. What we want to do is have it nice and juicy, and we add some water and mix it in the palette like this because I don't want any clumps of paint to hit my paper for this wet on wet technique. We want it nice and smooth, and then the paper nice and wet. I'm going to do my two largest petals first. So I wet the whole petal. The watercolor is magical when you do leave some whites of the page. So don't feel like you have to cover every single spot on your paper. When I wet it more towards the inside, and then I let the paint, I draw the lines with the paint and let it flow into that section. So you'll see. Now I'm also going to imagine that my light source is coming from the top right-hand side, which means there will be more light hitting on the top edges, and on the right-hand side there will be more cool colors hitting on the bottom side and the left-hand side. So keeping that in mind, I'm going to place some nice bright yellow along the top and the right-hand side of this petal. Then I'll switch over to the opera, where it will come near the bottom and the left-hand side. And as I said, don't feel like you have to fill in the whole thing. In this case, I did mostly fill it in. Let's see how it goes with the next petal. So we'll take some water and cover in the whole section of the petal with water, staying a little bit away from the edge. I don't know, 1/8 of an inch perhaps, or a couple of 10 millimeters. So I'm going to start with the yellow again. The yellow I have is my lightest valued color, and I'm placing it near the top and the right hand side. This time I'm going to try to leave more of a gap here so that I have room for the opera and still leave some nice, beautiful, bright white glowing through in the center. All right, there you have it, the first two petals. What I want to do now is I'll stop the camera for a moment and let that dry before proceeding with the other color so that they don't bleed into one another. Here we are. This section is nice and dry now. Maybe a little damp yet, but it's not running across. I'll place a little bit of the yellow near the top and towards the right-hand side, leaving a bit of a gap where we'll put some of the opera color near the bottom and the left-hand side. There we go. I'm going to repeat this with the remaining petals. Now this is just an underpainting, so if it does happen to run into some of the other areas you've already painted, no worries. The red will help to correct a lot of evils on our next layer. So because this petal is quite near the left-hand side, I'll use more of the opera. I'm using a synthetic brush. Nice stiff bristles push into the edge and make it nice and crisp. For my next petal, I'm going to leave just the tiniest gap between the two so that I reduce the chance that there will be bleeding between the layers. Although that pink just wanted to bridge the gap itself. And we do have a little bit of opera sneaking into our first layer here. Okay, so back to opera. I just love the way when the paper is already wet and you add a juicy paint, it just shoots across the page. And the yellow is added. Remember, because our light is coming from this direction, there will be more light near the top and the right hand side. The final petal, and because this one is on the right hand side, it will receive quite a bit of light. So we're going to make this one mostly yellow. Make it nice and rich to make sure you can see the effects of the underpainting. Okay, so our tulip is ready to go. Going to do is think about underpainting the stem and the petals. Yellow is a nice color for underpainting on green as well, because green is comprised of yellow as well. I do have some pink sneaking into my middle petal, so I'm just going to lift that. There we go. Okay, so back to the petal and the stem. Now, the light is coming from here. It would be blocked, so we won't really have any yellow here, just under the tulip. But if we travel a little farther down the stem, on the right-hand side, we will have some yellow. So I have wet it, and now I will add the yellow. I left a bit of a gap where there's no water, and it's going to remain white, so there's no underpainting there. I'm also going to add some yellow underpainting near this edge of the leaf. I'm wanting it nice and bright so that you will see it and you'll see the effects once the top coat is put on. You can decide how much or how little, how bright you want your underpaintings. I'm adding some yellow now to the second leaf. I'm blending out the edges a little bit with the water. So one more area that I think would be falling into the light, and it's dependent on whether the leaf is turned out or turned in. So in my imagining, the leaf is upright, quite a bit upright, and light is falling onto it. As well, on the other half, this leaf is folded in two, and this edge I'm imagining would also have some yellow, some light falling on it, so I want some yellow underpainting, making it nice and bright. This one I didn't paint wet on wet. I didn't want it to travel across the entire leaf. So I'm just blending it out a little bit to soften the transition. Even at this stage with underpainting, although it will be covered with another color, I do like to try to have some lights and darks for variety. So there you have it. This is the underpainting stage. We'll let that dry before we go on to paint the red layer and the sap green layer for the leaves. Red for the tulip and sap green for the leaves.